Bringing you the best local talk radio shows, Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7 FM, WFBT, Carolina Beach.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. God bless the USA.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to All Things Brunswick. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Bill. Good to be
Welcome
back.
back. Yeah. This is what, our third or fourth show already?
This is our fourth show, yeah.
We're moving right along. I'm really impressed by the fact that we survived this long. By the way, how'd your weekend go?
Well, my friend Jimmy Mock and I went to the Pepperoni Grill. We sat out back and enjoyed the cool ocean breeze while we had a couple of beers and 25 wings. It was great.
Ooh, sounds like I should have been there. I'm jealous.
Yes, you missed a good feed.
I'm sure I did. Pepperoni Grill. That's the one in
On the
Boiling
beach.
Springs, or the one on the beach.
We went to the one on the beach, yes.
So he has two places.
Yes, there are two pepperoni grills, one in Boiling Springs and one on Southport.
Well, we got a really good show for you today. Going to be very, very busy. I got a lot of things to talk
Yes.
about. Our first guest is on the line yet?
Becki Gray.
Becki Gray, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
Good to talk to you, Becki. This is Bill Moore.
And Joe Hunting.
Welcome to our show.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted to have this opportunity. You were so kind to invite me.
Hey, Becki, I'd like to have you explain who John Locke was and what are his philosophies that are so important to us today.
Well, they really are, and probably even more so than any other time. John Locke was an English philosopher who really, you think of him as we talk about the fathers of our country. John Locke was sort of the grandfather of our country, if you will. He was tremendously influential on the founders and what a new country could look like, and really believed in property rights and the rights that we all have that were granted from God were not other men's to take or give away from us. So a lot of what we're grappling with now as a country and looking back to the founders and the Constitution and those whole theories of natural rights really go all the way back to John Locke.
What year was that?
It was in the early 1700s.
I got you.
Becki, when you talk about Locke's philosophy, I know that you guys specialize in the economic side of it. Could you give our audience a brief overview of how that works?
Yeah, so our organization, of course, named after John Locke for the reasons that I just told you, and we focus on, first of all, we focus on North Carolina issues. We're only here in North Carolina. We're not part of a national group. We focus on issues that are important to North Carolinians and North Carolina issues. We primarily focus on things like property rights and economic and fiscal issues. So we do a lot on taxes and budget. We do a lot on education. We do a lot on regulation. We do a lot of things about the environment and energy. We do a lot of those kind of issues and we have been in North Carolina for over 30 years and have been very consistent in what our policies are and what our mission is. We change to address particular issues as they come up, but those fundamental principles of lower government, personal responsibility, restrained spending, property rights, and fiscal responsibility are what have been consistent over the years.
Maybe you could tell us about what's currently being discussed in the legislature, especially regarding budget.
Yeah, well, that's a great question and certainly a timely question because we are at the General Assembly. They are right in the middle of the budget negotiations. As a matter of fact, the Senate has rolled their budget out. I got my copy of it last night about 5:30. So it's all, it's all relatively new. We're still going through it. But this is part of the regular budget process in North Carolina, that the governor proposes his or her budget early on, and really you can tell a lot from the budget of what priorities are for people. And so Governor Cooper proposed his budget. It was a tremendous increase in spending, an incredible expansion of government. So when it came over to the General Assembly, because the General Assembly is the majority Republicans, and I think, to be honest with you, I think most North Carolinians recognize that the governor's budget was kind of a wish list, if you will, and so they have there's kind of a joke in Raleigh that the governor's budget makes a great doorstop in most legislative offices. So they've started over, and the Senate has come out with their budget just in the since yesterday. And again, sort of the tradition or the process is that every 2 years the House or the Senate comes out with their budget, and they take turns. So this is the Senate's time to go first. That's why we're starting in the Senate. So what we've seen is the budget was released. Not a complete surprise. We knew what the bottom line spending was going to be, because the House and the Senate budget negotiators had agreed to that bottom line spending amount. And so what we're seeing now is the Senate priorities. The two budget documents that make up the document is over 1,000 pages. So again, we're still going through it. But we'll see this, and what is anticipated is that the Senate will have a vote on the budget by the end of the week, and then it will go over to the House, and then the process starts all over again, and the House will have their proposal. We don't anticipate that it will be tremendously different than the Senate's, but it will be different. The House has some different priorities than the Senate does. We've already learned that during different discussions. And then the two House and Senate groups will come together, and they will work out the differences between the two, get it over to the governor, and then we'll see what the governor does with it.
Can you tell us the biggest difference comparing the Senate to the governor's budget? And I realize you only received the Senate one, so that may not be a fair question.
No. That's really a fair question, because, and I think the without getting into like the specific line items of things, it really has to do with a philosophy of what is the role of government. And the governor's budget spends a lot more money, I think in the neighborhood of about 8% increase over last year's spending. The Senate budget is 3% over last year's budget. So, that tells you something right there. And then you get into some of the specifics of it. The governor has a 10% pay increase for teachers over the next 2 years. The Senate has a 3% pay increase for teachers over the 2 years, 1.5% each year. But they have pay increases and bonuses across the board for all state employees, and actually have a little bit bigger bump, a little bit bigger adjustment for some of the correctional officers and some of our state employees that are involved in law enforcement. So again, you kind of, as you look at those two things, you kind of get an idea of what the priorities are. And one analogy that I would make with it is you can tell a lot about someone if you had access to their checkbook. If you went into your checkbook and looked at where you spend your money and where your priorities are, it tells you a lot about what you believe is important and what your philosophy is. Well, it's the same thing with the state government budget. A difference in that they're spending someone else's money, of course, but you begin to see what the differences are. Something else that really stood out in the Senate budget is there are pretty significant tax cuts in the Senate budget. We have a lot of money in North Carolina. Some of that is because of the federal money that has come in, but a lot of it is just a result of tax revenues that our economy was stronger than many had anticipated going into the COVID pandemic. And so actually we're in pretty good shape, at least for now, economically. And what Roy Cooper would do is he would spend all of that money with, like I mentioned, big salary increases for teachers and big expansion of government and government programs. The Senate has said, we've got a problem here, and the problem is we're taking too much of people's money, and we need to get that back to the people. What they're proposing now is to lower the personal income tax again from 5.5% down to 4.99%, and then down again to 3.99% by 2016. Phasing out the corporate income tax and then increasing the standard deduction for that, increasing that zero tax bracket where there's, a large amount of people who won't be paying any income tax. And then also, and this is just sort of a personal favorite of mine, is their budget invests in families by increasing the per-child tax deduction by $500 per child. And I just believe that the strength of the fabric of our society and who we are as North Carolinians believes in the strength of the family. So the fact that there was a nod in this tax package to additional help for families that are raising children. So what that all comes down to is for a family of four earning, the median household income in North Carolina, that's a 37% tax cut that the Senate has in their budget, which is pretty substantial.
Yes, it is.
So those are just a few of the things that I've noticed.
One question on that, just as a correction so our people don't get confused. What you meant was the 3.99 was in 2022, not 2016?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the 4.99% would go into effect in 2022, and then in 2026, it would go down to 3.99%. Yeah,
glad we clarified
I'm sorry.
that.
Lot of numbers here.
That's true. You know what I find fascinating, just from my viewpoint, he's pushing for this large bump for teachers, yet over the last 4 or 5 years, he's vetoed the budget from the legislature saying there was not enough money for teachers. So instead of them getting 1 or 2%, 0 is so much better.
Exactly. It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
As a matter of fact, Roy Cooper, since he has been the governor, has vetoed every single budget that has hit his desk. Now, the difference in prior years was there were some Democrats who would side with the Republicans and vote to override his veto. But over the last several years, the last 2 budgets, there have not been that. He has really held the Democrat caucus feet to the fire and has put tremendous pressure on them to withstand his veto. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. As a matter of fact, in the last budget, there was a 4.9% pay increase for teachers, and Governor Cooper vetoed that. So when you hear all this stuff about, teachers are mad because they haven't gotten a pay increase, they need to, Roy Cooper is the one they need to be yelling at, not the Republican General Assembly. The Republican General Assembly had pay increases in there for teachers. Governor Cooper is the one who vetoed it.
They're not hooked to any cost of living index or anything like that automatically would keep pace with inflation.
Well, it would depend on it would depend on what the raise was and what the inflation rate was. But speaking of that and speaking of inflation and tying things together, one of the things that I think is interesting is since Republicans took over in 2011, every single budget that they have put into place has been at or below the growth of inflation plus population. And that averages out to be, it depends on the year, it depends on the population growth and inflation, obviously. But, that's in the neighborhood of 2.5 to maybe 4.5% growth when it's been tied to that. Some people call that a TABOR, a Taxpayer Bill of Rights number. Some states have that as a law that the budget has to be within that limit. Some states even have it written into their constitution. North Carolina has neither, but what they have had for the last 10 years is a group of legislators who understand what fiscal restraint and fiscal responsibility is and what that does for an economy. And so this is another budget from the General Assembly that is below that rate of inflation plus population. And that was the number that the House and the Senate agreed on before they even started talking about the budget. Now, again, the governor's budget was like in the neighborhood of 7 or 8%, which is way over what that formula, that calculation would be. So, you know, again, it's a difference in the way that you look at the role of government and the responsibility that government has, and kind of, I think, the attitude that people have towards taxpayers. So,
I would think that one of the things that our listeners should be aware of is how good the Republicans were in putting that rainy day fund away, so that when we have crisis time, there's money there, and they're not borrowing from Peter and Paul to pay it.
You know, exactly. And that was something else that we've seen over this last 10 years is as the economy has recovered, and even with the tax breaks that they've given and returning the money to the taxpayer, they have done that. They've paid down debt. They have put money aside in a rainy day fund, and boy, weren't we glad that we had it over this last year. And in this budget, this Senate budget that we're seeing, there's a lot of money that's coming in, and one of the things that they're doing is putting even more money into the rainy day fund, because as rosy and as good as the economic picture is right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in front of us. There's a lot of economic decisions that are going to be made by the Biden administration that North Carolinians and North Carolina lawmakers have no control over. There's also a lot of unrest across the world and global unrest in the economy. Again, things that would very well impact North Carolina's economy that we don't have any control over. So to put this money aside and to be really smart about it, and to have that cushion, because the worst thing that you could possibly imagine, if the economy goes sour and if we go back into a recession or go through an economic downturn, the last thing you want to do is to increase taxes on the hardworking men and women who, are trying to hold on to a job, and certainly the businesses that are trying to stay afloat so that they can continue to keep their employees. So that's part of the, when we talk about a rainy day, I think a lot of us, particularly, you all that live on the coast, we think of being hit with a hurricane or the flooding or those natural disasters that we have, and that's certainly part of it. But the other thing that this rainy day fund will help with is if we have an economic storm, so to speak. So, that's a great point, and you're exactly right to put that money in the rainy day fund. And then the other thing is, I'm looking through this Senate budget. They also are putting money into some reserve accounts. For example, there's money put into a reserve account at the Department of Public Instruction to make sure that we have the money to cover enrollment growth. So the Catherine Truitt, the superintendent of public instruction, has looked at all the numbers and done the calculations and said, okay, it looks like there's going to be this many students who will be moving into North Carolina over the next year, so we need to budget for that. But they've even put money into like a pot, like a reserve account, in case her estimations are off. We have the same kind of thing going on with some of the health care, some of the Medicaid. If something happens, let's make sure that they're reserved. So it's even better than just the rainy day fund. There are these reserve accounts that are set up in different places through these state agencies.
Well, I would also just, as a quick reminder before we wrap up the economic side of this, our listeners should be aware of the fact that when the Republicans took over, there was a $2 billion deficit to the federal government from unemployment that they actually paid off, and they still managed to build this rainy day fund.
Exactly. And, Bill, that same year, there was a $650 million shortfall
I remember
in
that.
the state budget. Yeah. So, and this big debt that they didn't even know about. They inherited that from the Democrats who had been in charge. And so, what they've been able to do and to turn our economy around the way that they have. And, just to put that in perspective, so in 2011, when we were going into the budget cycle, there was a $650 million shortfall and a $2.6 billion debt to the federal government, as you mentioned. Going into this budget, there is $4 billion in revenue. There's an additional $6 billion that is, the projections are just coming in now of additional revenue that we have, and there's the $5 billion that came in for the federal government. So, again, the first thing the Senate said was, we need to give some of this money back to the people that have earned it.
Sounds
First
good
thing
to
the
me.
governor said was, we need to spend it. So, again, a real difference.
Hey, one more area that I think John Locke and you would be agreeing on, and that is voter integrity. What laws are pending now that could ensure that?
Well, there's a lot out there. There's one that's going through the General Assembly that deals with absentee ballots. And this seems very simple to me. What this would do is it would say that the deadline to get your ballot, to return your ballot, is on Election Day. By 7:30 on Election Day, just like all the other votes have to be in by that day. What we had during this last election, and, remember, too, that during this last election, there were a lot of things that were put into place because we were dealing with a pandemic. So I think that's important to remember. The question now is, going towards the next election, do we still need to have those waivers and those exceptions and that sort of special treatment, because we're not going to be dealing with, with the effects of the pandemic. So last election, there was, in 2020, there was a 3-day grace period, you may remember, and there was a lot of controversy about ballots being mailed, people finding ballots, were things postmarked appropriately. There just was a lot of confusion about it. And so the General Assembly looked around the country at what other states were doing, and I can't remember now. I want to say it's 32 states. I don't have those notes right in front of me, but there are more than half the states do require that absentee ballots, or that the deadline for voting is on Election Day. So there is a bill that's going through with that. And good grief, you would think that, the response from some of the Democratic members has been, pretty extreme. So that's been quite controversial. Another one that I think is really interesting is this question about voter ID. And the voters of North Carolina overwhelmingly voted for that when we voted to amend our Constitution to require a photo ID when we went to vote. The court stepped in and said that, we couldn't do that, and so the General Assembly has taken all of those notes and all of the criticism from the left about the voter ID and tried to address the concerns that people have. And so this latest on this is they are even going to, if you are unable to get out to get a photo ID, they will come to your house.
I'd heard that.
And, I don't know how I don't know how you can be any more accommodating than that. So that's the latest effort on the voter ID.
Is there any projection on it getting through the signature at the governor?
The one on the absentee ballots, it was a clear party line vote along those lines, and so probably if it gets to the governor, he will veto it. The absentee ballot, I think there were more. The vote was a little more in line with a bipartisan vote on that particular bill. But both of those are still very active at the General Assembly, so we don't know when that will go. Well, first of all, we don't know whether the House will take them up, and then we don't know whether what the governor will do with it, and then when it comes back to the General Assembly, what the Democrat members might do to override the governor's veto. So it's still up in the air, but clearly a lot of questions about the elections. And as you mentioned, it really is, in my view, all of these questions are about the integrity of the election. And a lot of the proposals that have been made really are to ensure that there is integrity and that people have confidence in the system. Because if people feel like their vote doesn't count or an election is rigged before they get there, people they're not going to vote. They're going to think, well, what's the point, on this? And I think that's the worst case scenario that we would have, is that people just become disinterested and disengaged in the system. So, and I think that now between these elections is clearly the time to address these things. We can look back and see where the problems were and then make efforts to fix them.
Becki, in the 3 minutes or so we have left, could you give us what you think are either already are or will be the highlights of this session of the General Assembly?
I think that...
Hello? Did we lose you? Hello, you still there, Beck? We're having some technical difficulties here. I know the question wasn't too hard. We've talked about that before. So we'll give it another second and we'll try to reach him again. And in the meantime, for those of you who know about Becki Gray is the Vice President of Outreach for John Locke. She works extensively with the legislator. As a matter of fact, they will come back to her and they'll often ask her for recommendations for committee positions that are available. I would tell you that years ago when I lived up in the Edenton area, they looked for someone to get her involved with the North Commission, and I was appointed to that based on her recommendation. So she's got a lot of influence in there, and she's earned that right to have that influence. She's a very hard worker and a good person. If we don't have her coming back, I guess we will say we're finished with her. Aside from that,
thank you, Becki.
Thank you, Becki. It was very, very informative.
Very informative.
And I know there are lots of highlights. We'll have to bring you back on one of our upcoming shows when the legislature finishes up, and we will finish up that good information. Anyway, we've reached that point where it's time to pay some sponsors and pay our bills here. So thank you and stay tuned.
Think about a living. Let's think about a loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the bopping and the lovey-doving. Let's forget about the whining and the crying and the shooting and the dying and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life. Let's think about living. Let's think about life. Let's think about living. Let's think about life. Let's think about living.
I'm Jason Gaver, and I'm running for Leland Town Council because Leland is where my wife and I are raising our daughter. I have a clear vision for Leland's future, keeping taxes as low as possible, spending every dollar wisely, focusing on core priorities like infrastructure and public safety, planning for future growth. I'm ready to serve, and I ask for your support. If you have questions or would like to learn more, please visit jasongaver.com. Paid for by the Committee to Elect Jason Gaver.
Are you nervous about joining a gym? Anxious about not being able to keep up with others in the fitness classes? Full Circle Fitness has your solution. We specialize in working with those just getting started on their fitness journey. Our coaches tailor each workout to you and your level of ability, so you don't have to worry about keeping up. There's no better opportunity to get started. Call today, Full Circle Fitness, 910-399-8350, or visit FullCircleFitnessNC.com.
Hey, this is Charlie Miller, your state representative in the North Carolina House. Just wanted to say thank you for listening. If you get a chance to go on Facebook and search Representative Charlie Miller to receive my exclusive legislative updates to keep you up to date with all of what's happening in Raleigh. You can also sign up for my newsletter to have a direct line of information straight from the Capitol. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Paid for by the Committee to Elect Charlie Miller for NC House.
Welcome back to All Things Brunswick. We apologize for the technical glitch, and we'll probably bring Becki back somewhere in the future to finish that conversation, because she's an interesting woman with a lot of information that the Brunswick people need to hear, and I guess the region would like to hear that also. At this point, our next guest is on the line, Dr. Tony Maglione. Tony, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Doctor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We brought you on because there's a lot going on with COVID, and there's a lot of rumor control out there. And, you know, as a medical doctor who I've known for years and who I trust eminently, would you like to share some of that data with us?
I sure would. Well, thank you. Just like to inform your listening audience that we've got a lot of misinformation about COVID since last March 2020. And not only were there misinformation, it's actually has hurt the public. So I'm going to clarify some of those issues. And as you know, Bill, and a lot of the audience, I've been on the air on this station and others since March and April of last year, kind of talking about COVID and the mask and the lockdown and the things, treatments that could work. And it's been a real tragedy what's happened since last March. And I'll tell you why. Medicine and science have been politicized. We're not getting the truth anymore. For those of us that love our profession and love the truth to be out there so that people can actually be helped by our advice and our treatments, it's been, like I said, a real travesty. And let me start giving just a couple of examples here quickly. I'll quickly go over the mask. There are no studies that show an advantage of the mask. It has been about a power play. It's about a grab just to see if people have obedience. We have no studies that show an advantage of wearing a mask. As a doctor, we wear these surgical masks in certain situations in hospital, in offices, nursing homes, etc. And the mask size doesn't filter out the COVID size as it doesn't filter out the flu size, since they're about the same size. So, and people can look that up. They don't have to believe me. Just do your research. Get the truth, because they're not telling it to you. And the things that upset me more, this is the two things that upset me more than anything else, was the treatment and the lockdowns. We knew since 2005 hydroxychloroquine treated a form of SARS, treated SARS-1. Fauci's own associate in the department of the NIH actually wrote an article. It's out there to be investigated and looked at. And I had looked at it last March. And they had already seen that hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine worked on SARS-1, which is the predecessor of SARS-2, which is COVID-19. So if it worked then, there was no reason not to use it. They vilified the medicine mostly because of non-medical reasons, mostly for political reasons, as you know. And I believe that over 100,000 Americans have died because of that, and probably over 1 million people in the world. It's a real travesty. We knew a few months later ivermectin worked even better than hydroxychloroquine. These drugs have to be used early at first symptoms, just like we do with the flu, to keep people out of the hospital. And the lockdowns. We've already known in the past that lockdowns cause unintended consequences, where people who are poor don't have jobs, they get depressed, there's more suicide, there's more drug abuse, there's more heart disease, there's more cancer, and more mental illness. We've had studies from the Lancet 2015 looking at poor areas in all of Europe, and we can compare apples to apples and tell you that probably another 50 or 100,000 people are going to die because of lack of treatment or because of depression, because of suicides, and the things I just mentioned. So those two things really upset me.
And that would include the elective surgeries that were stopped too, right?
Exactly. There were a lot of delays. People don't understand that when you have economic factors in an illness or a pandemic, you're having unintended consequences if you're trying to control it by government without sound science. There was no reason to do the lockdowns. There was a reason to keep people away from big crowds, like in stadiums and concerts and things of that nature. But it was not that businesses should close. That was absurd. That was done for other reasons, obviously, in an attempt to hurt the economy in an election year, as many of you very well know. They lied about the Wuhan lab. That was where we all thought it originated. Nobody believed that bats were flying around in a wet market. And we all knew, and now it's coming out that it's proof. And not only that, and I didn't know at that time, but I know now, it's Fauci and the CDC who actually gave the money for the grant to manipulate the SARS-1 virus which has now become the SARS-2 virus. We don't know if it leaked out accidentally yet or if it was on purpose. We'll probably find that out sometime in the future. One of the things to point out is the fear factor. They installed so much fear so that people would respond and obey with the mask. There are people on the right who are still convinced Fauci's the greatest and the masks are the greatest. And there's no evidence, zero evidence. And it's just terrible. And as a doctor, if you care about human beings, you don't instill fear in any illness or any pandemic. You give understanding and confidence and talk about how you're going to take care of the problem. And we actually had treatments at that time with hydroxychloroquine that were effective early. And so they lied to us. They lied to us even about the death rates because they exacerbated it. They had economic incentives for hospitals to change how they did their death certificates. And with all of that, they lied it and tell the truth, misinformation. You know, back in the Bronx, I call misinformation a lie, but other people may be nicer and call it just misinformation. But if they're going to do that, do you think they're telling us the truth about the vaccines? They're actually having to bribe people to take the vaccines. So I'll pause here, and then after you ask me a couple of questions, and then after I want to talk a little bit about the vaccines as to who should get them and who shouldn't get them. But
and I have a question about that later also, especially with my grandkids involved. But the one thing I'd like to point out to support what you're saying, the L.A. County came out just a couple of weeks ago and said that they overestimated their COVID deaths by as much as 25%. And I agree with you that the rationale behind it was hospitals got paid a lot more money for a COVID illness than they did for regular.
Right, and money talks, and it's just so sad because it's a driving force now that doctors are mostly working for hospitals, and hospitals are based on production, and production is about keeping people in the hospital who make money. It's a very strange thing we're getting. Medicine has become politicized, not just from politics and the press, but also within the big establishments of big hospital business. But let me tell you about the vaccines so I can just kind of tell you about that.
Sure.
I would tell you only about 25% of the people in this country really need to be taking the vaccine. That's only about 80 million, and I'll tell you why. We know this vaccine is an RNA virus. It's different. A messenger RNA transmitted goes into our cells and works differently than all the previous vaccines that we took. And it works differently because it doesn't go right to the lymph nodes and start your immune system. Half of it, almost half of it, travels throughout the body. And we're seeing with the reports of adverse reactions, we're seeing almost 10 times more adverse reaction report than we have with other vaccines. And we're only half a year into it, so it could be as much as 20 times. And we know factually that there's a certain number of cases affecting young people in my field with myocarditis and pericarditis, which are heart inflammations from the virus, which is being caused because the messenger RNA travels in the bloodstream more than the other types of vaccines. And so when that happens, people are exposed to the virus. You've got young people getting sick and possibly having more serious ailments than you would normally. We know by the numbers now that there are already 3 times more in 6 months of these type of illnesses.
When you say young people, what age group are we talking about?
We're talking about, Joe, under 25. Basically, it could be under 30, but the statistics now that they're looking at is under 25. And so in a year, we're having 5 or 6 times more adverse reactions of young people having affected the heart. And these are generally healthy people. As you probably know, the number of people, your risk of getting a sick ailment with COVID, if you're under 25, is about 1/6 your chance of dying or getting a sickness from a car accident. So are we now going to tell everybody under the age of 25 you can't get in a car? We have a way of abusing the science and the facts so that we don't understand risk aversion. See, this was a great opportunity to tell people how to take care of themselves, how to develop a better, stronger immune system. Everything was the opposite. They took people from outside. They let kids not go to school and socialize, which created much more depression and mental illness and social isolation. They separated us by 6 feet. By the way, no study to support that ever has been done. but they just arbitrarily just selected that. And there was a reason for that. It is a form of control. It's just not science, and it really is sad. There are people who also don't need the vaccine besides those under 25, other than, there's a small percentage, I better state this, that do have certain illnesses, uncontrolled diabetes, obesity, cancer, autoimmune problems at a young age, or some type of heart disease that may be congenital that is causing problems. About 1% of them, which is a small amount since there's about 100 million people under the age of 25.
Tony,
So,
quick question for you following on vaccine. There's a debate going on right now because most colleges are saying kids should not come back unless they're vaccinated. And there's actually some studies coming out saying that's not a great idea. What's your thoughts, or what have you seen on that?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. Number one, I would go further in my nice New York way and say that this is child abuse. Make anybody, number one, let alone kids under 25, where I consider the risk of the vaccine to be greater than the benefit of taking the vaccine. And the risk of the COVID is less than taking the vaccine. So therefore, as doctors, we give treatment based on whether it's good or bad for you. If it's a chance that it's more good, you give it. If it's more bad, you don't give it. You do no harm as a doctor. So these people that are making people take the vaccine who are in the age group of a college and telling them they can't go in, as you know, some of those universities are not making their professors take the vaccine, who are older and many of them much more vulnerable to getting the infection. It is complete hypocrisy. It's absurd, and I consider it abuse in every form and fashion. So it's just not right. But there are other populations that should not be taking the vaccine. There's 33 million Americans who have gotten COVID. They have no need to take a vaccine. They've got natural immunity. And all of us who knew Immunology 101 understood that a long time ago. But yet, they're making people take the vaccine. Can you imagine being a kid with COVID and they're making you take the vaccine and undergo unnecessary risks? And now we know the Cleveland Clinic, I trained in cardiology, just came out with a report literally investigating 52,000 of their employees for over a year. And everyone that got COVID, not one got it again. So that tells you there's long-lasting immunity. It is really malpractice and just wrong and unethical to be forcing people to take a vaccine when they don't need it and they have what I would consider better immunity than the vaccine.
So what you're saying is if you've developed the COVID and you recovered from it, that's better than the vaccine, and you really shouldn't need the vaccine.
Right, and there's studies out there that actually show that, but they're not going to put that out because they've got a different agenda, and it just infuriates me. The things that they did by not allowing us to use medicines off-label, like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, it was just sad. Just so many unnecessary people died and suffered because of this and were hospitalized or nearly died, and it's just wrong. Now, there are groups that need it. The number one risk factor was being over the age of 75. That's because their immune system is down, and many of them have comorbid conditions. There are a few 75-year-olds that may be biologically over 75, but physically are 10 or 15 years younger. So there's maybe 10% of them that don't need the vaccine. But that group of 75 and older do need it, and I do recommend it. And of the people
for our audience, Tony, would you kind of explain what comorbidity is? Comorbidity?
Yeah, comorbidity are the things I mentioned before that are a factor in raising your chances of having a bad outcome if you do get COVID. And that's, you got uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled high blood pressure, significant heart disease, significant lung disease, significant kidney disease, autoimmune problems, or cancer. Those are the major ones. And so those are the kind of comorbid, and obesity, by the way, a bad metabolic syndrome. Many of them have pretty bad diabetes also. And they tend to do the worst. And in the age group between 50 and 75, about half of those people meet that group. So if you take those people, the people under 25, the people over 75, and then look at the people between 25 and 50, about 10% of those people fit into those comorbidities and would be at higher risk and would need the vaccine. That means only about 80 million people would actually need the vaccine, which is less than a quarter of the population of the United States. And you have to ask yourself, start questioning, why are they giving you money and gifts to make you take the vaccine. Why is it so necessary? Why can't you just tell them, hey, we think you need it, why we think you need it, and it's your choice. And the fact that they're forcing it and bribing people makes me very weary of their ultimate goal in this situation. So I just wanted to point that out because I believe the people that listen to you are smart enough to know a lot of this, but some of them have been so brainwashed by the media that it's even hard for them to filter through what the real truth is.
Well, I agree with you because I've gone to certain places and some very intelligent people will come in wearing a mask, and I'm looking at them and I just don't want to say anything because it's their right.
Exactly. Person wants to wear a mask, they can. It's not. I'm going to tell you right now, you wear a mask for more than 2 hours, a cloth mask, there is no question in my mind you increasing your chances with the humidity of getting more infection. You're increasing your chance of getting pneumonia. You also increasing your chance of changing your O2 and CO2 right in your face, right there, and actually causing migraines and other issues. And I've had nurses and stuff who have been in the hospital, and they'll tell me about all this stuff that it's causing for them. And it's just not right because you shouldn't force somebody to do something if there's no medical proof that it has a benefit. It's incredible. So as a doctor, it's been very frustrating to
And
watch.
I would assume you're saying that aside from an N95 properly fit on you, the rest of the stuff is basically useless?
Well, I think the N95 would be good if you're trying to help yourself. Because we never, in the history of the world, quarantined people that were healthy. This is the first time. It's unheard of medically. We never, in this country, in other countries they did, we never forced people to wear masks because we knew from previous studies that the size of that particle, the COVID particle, doesn't avoid getting inside a mask, a cloth mask or a surgical mask. So the N95 is probably good on those short trips, by plane, if you really want to protect yourself, if you think you're going to be around infectious places. But if you've got a good immune system, then, you don't need that. But, the airplanes are still making us do it. We're going to New York next week. I know we're going in the building we're going. They're making us wear a mask. It's absurd. It's gone beyond any comprehension in terms of truth and medical facts.
I find it somewhat ironic also. You get in an airplane and they're filling every seat now, but you got to have a mask on.
Well, don't worry. The new mayor of New York will fix it all up, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, they're monitoring too. I mean, as you know, a lot of the big CEOs have monetarily been all part of this because they ended up doing well because they ended up killing small business with the lockdowns, and so a lot of that was done intentionally to make the rich richer and make the middle class smaller and poorer. And it's about it's easier to control people if they're dependent on government.
They didn't want to worry their sales or reduce their sales in China either.
Exactly. There's other factors here that we can go into that are not related to the healthcare aspect. But my most important message was really to let people know they haven't been told the truth. Not everything I'm saying is 100%, but I'm telling you that 90% of what they're telling you is wrong. Fauci was wrong on everything. He's contradicted himself on everything. Yet he's acted, as Tucker would say, he's acted like he's a saint or something. And actually, he's probably closer to the devil than anybody else because of the number of lives he could have saved by just supporting his own research from 15 years earlier.
He didn't want the world to know that he was financing the ability to step up the lethalness of these vaccines by going through this Wuhan laboratory.
Exactly. And also to help his friends get more vaccines produced. And he's involved in, by the way, the NIH, even though they get our tax money, they get to also patent their own vaccines and make money and increase the power within their own department.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. It's totally, it's like government. It's like when you saw here locally in New Hanover, they gave themselves over 80% raises while they want to raise property tax, whatever it was, 12%. I mean, they're crooks. These are all crooks. They're all stealing from us. They're doing it now easily because they've got a media that's in it, enabling them to lie and convince people of these lies to the point that they make them scared to death of not doing what they're told. And it's just not right. It's just not right. And I feel sorry for this country for what a lot of people, went through because of these lies and the suffering. And look, it is a real disease, and it's about twice as bad for elderly people than the flu is, for people over 50. But it's not as bad for people under 50 if you compare apples to apples. And they just won't tell you that. They just want the mass hysteria and fear to be part of the campaign so that they can control the message more and get whatever lie or mistruth they want out there.
Tony, if people wanted more information about this, do you have a website they can look at?
Well, I have one website, but I didn't do much on this. My podcasts are more on my Facebook account with Dr. Tony Maglione, Political Pulse with Dr. Tony Maglione. I did some podcasts on that. But my Facebook, my regular website is Dr. Tony Mag, DrTonyMag.com, and it's got some stuff there, but not as much on this. I did more of that in podcasts and on the radio and some local speeches to people.
But there are podcasts they can find to hear that if they choose to.
But yeah, and bottom line is just do the research. It is out there. It takes hours and the ability to know what is true and what is not true or BS. And they're giving us a lot of stuff that is not true, and it's incredibly scary. That's why I wanted to get this out there a while ago when they were talking about this with the young people and vaccinations. Because to me, it's almost criminal to force anybody to have a vaccine, but much more so in the young, where the harm is greater than the benefit of taking the vaccine.
Okay, my partner has a question for you, a little bit off track, but it deals with something else that you do very well.
Yes, I've learned that you're a famous writer as well, and you wrote a book called The Rules for Conservative Patriots. I'd like you to explain some of those, and I know the other one that you're trying to sound like was The Rules for Radicals by Alinsky. Maybe you could bounce those two ideas around.
Well, I wrote that title because we're a country that has become more and more having a percentage of our population believe in the rules for radicals. The whole movement between Antifa, which is not anti-fascist, which is actually a fascist movement, and Black Lives Matter, which is not about black lives, is more of a Marxist movement. These are all anti-American movements. And Saul Alinsky was anti-American. And if you're Marxist, you try to destroy a strong country from within. And they're doing it very well. You control the media, you control the education, you get the crooks in Washington, D.C. and government to be bought and do what you want, and you just sit back and watch as the country destroys itself from within. So I wrote that book that there should be rules for us conservative patriots who actually love this country, believe in God, and actually believe in truth. And so that we can actually be equipped to fight back and learn how to think, not just accept what people tell you. Because if you accept what people tell you, you're not thinking.
No.
And that's not fair.
And where can someone get that book?
They can get that book in Amazon, or you can go to my website, Dr. Tony Mag, DrTonyMag.com. There's a couple other books in there that I've written on Obamacare and how to vote to save this country. And I got involved about 11 years ago when my last kid went to college, and I had time on the weekends to start looking into things more. And it just alarmed me because 11 years ago, I predicted that we were going in this direction. I kind of didn't think it was going to happen this soon, but I knew we were going there. I think COVID allowed the left to do what they want sooner, and the ability to, manipulate the election.
Well, Tony, we've reached that point in the show where we have to thank you for coming on, and we have to start our close down.
Yes.
But please consider coming back with us again and updating us as we need to be.
Sure. Anytime. I love being on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us again.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Tony Maglione. Thank you. Well, people, we've had a very, very interesting run here today with a lot of information that we've shared with you in a lot of areas. One thing I would like to talk to you about is a real quick run on opportunity scholarships. Okay. We have a couple of minutes, and we're going to do a small version of that one. For those of you who don't know, the General Assembly put out, a few years ago, they put out what they call opportunity scholarships, and it was designed to help poorer kids get into better schools. And it's been put out there, and I think this coming year, there's like 10,000 scholarships available, millions of dollars that go into it, and you can apply for it online. And if you qualify, you can go to a number of private schools and go in there, and they've agreed in advance. There's like 400 schools around the state that they'll take that money, and you'll get a voucher for $4,200 to go to that school and pay your tuition to go there and start a new life. I mean, if you will, get to a school with the round peg fits the round hole rather than the square peg in the round hole. So it's out there. Interestingly enough, our governor and our Democratic legislature is against it. And I believe they're against it because of the teachers union issues with that, because it does take students out of schools and puts them someplace else, and the public schools get paid for the number of kids sitting there. You should also be aware that we spend approximately $10,000 a year on education per child. In round numbers, is actually a little bit over that. So we're giving $4,200 to these schools. Where does the rest of the money go? Well, we don't keep it. It actually goes to those school districts so they don't yell so much about losing that student. So they're getting paid $4,000 or $5,000, maybe a little bit more, and the student's not coming. But those opportunity scholarships are out there, and it allows students who are in a school that doesn't work, economically impoverished, if you will, a chance to go to a better school. So it's out there. Look it up online and apply for it. It's there in great numbers, and it's been more successful year after year. Again, it's called Opportunity Scholarships. Well, we're actually in close-down mode. I can't believe we're there already, my friend. Let's do a commercial break before we come back and pay a few bills again and let our sponsors know what's going on.
Hey there, it's Charlie Miller, your state representative for Brunswick and New Hanover counties. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to check out my Facebook page, Representative Charlie Miller, to stay up to date on everything that's happening in the state legislature. You can also sign up for my weekly legislative newsletter to receive a more detailed report on how the voices of District 19 are being heard in Raleigh. If my office can be of any assistance to you, please reach out at 919-733-6753. Paid for by the committee to elect Charlie Miller for NC House.
Leland needs new, fresh leadership. We need Jason Gaver, a husband, father, veteran, and small business owner, a proven leader who is engaged in our community. Jason's only agenda is to shape a positive future for the town where his daughter will grow up. He has a servant's heart and the strength to be an independent voice. Jason Gaver is the new leader we need. Visit jasongaver.com to learn more. Paid for by the committee to elect Jason Gaver.
How far would you go if you had a group of strong, amazing people who support, motivate, and inspire one another to achieve their fitness goals and dreams? At Full Circle Fitness, we aren't just a place to work out. We're a community of amazing people who work together to reclaim our bodies and do things we thought we'd never be able to do again. Ready to set your fears aside and stop making excuses? Call today, Full Circle Fitness, 910-399-8350, or visit FullCircleFitnessNC.com.
There it is. Oh, jeez.
Welcome back, everybody, as we wrap up our show. As our usual, we close up with our usual two items. We're going to tell you what's going on that's important this week. If you live in Brunswick and you're a precinct chair, there's training going on today between 6 and 9 p.m. at the headquarters. It's also going to happen Saturday morning from 9 to 12. So precinct chairs, if you want to get trained, it's a good place to be. A couple of things that are very, very important to everyone. July 1st, down at the Brunswick County Courthouse in Bolivia, there's going to be what we call a patriotic hoot singing. If you remember, years ago, there used to be what they call flash mobs. Before they became destructive, people would just show up and sing, or they would dance and then disappear. Well, a similar thing is going to be happening at the Brunswick County Courthouse, where people at roughly at 8:45, promptly at 8:45 on the 1st, inside the courthouse, there's going to be a group of people gathering, and they're just going to sing a number of patriotic songs, and then when they're done, just disappear. They would recommend that you get there by like 8:30 because it's a courthouse. You got to park, and you also got to go through security to get in there. So it's a good, fun thing to do if you want to enjoy that. July 1st, and it's right around the 4th of July, so it's an excellent time to be looking at it. Real quick, another major event coming up.
The Freedom?
Yeah, why don't you do that one?
Freedom Rules. That's where we have a hot dog and
the Freedom
picnic.
Celebration on the 10th.
On the 10th, yes.
It's going to be down again in Bolivia, and it's open to anybody that wants to come from noon till about 3, and we're just celebrating our freedoms. There'll be all kinds of people there talking. There'll be some candidates talking about the future. and it's a good time to be had by all. So if you're free on the 10th of July, get down to Bolivia to the Republican headquarters and have a hot dog and a soda and talk to similar type people.
Next week, Tony, we've got 2 deputy sheriffs from the Brunswick Sheriff's Department. But we're going to talk about scammers.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
You didn't give me
Once there was a silly old ram, thought he'd punch a hole in a dam. No one could make that ram scram. He kept butting that dam 'cause he had high hopes. He had high hopes. He had high apple pie in the sky hopes. So anytime you're feeling bad, instead of feeling sad, just remember that ram.
Bringing you the best local talk radio shows, Wilmington's Big Talker 106.